"Mommy's sick, but she'll still smile if you come to my party," the little girl said to the man. The moment changed everything, not with a sound, but with a look so small and hopeful it felt heavier than any scream. On a cold autumn afternoon in a quiet American park, a man who believed his life had already hardened beyond repair felt something crack open inside his chest, right there between fallen leaves and a lonely wooden bench. He had survived boardrooms, losses, headlines, and silence, but he was not prepared for the way a child's courage could undo him in a single breath. If you believe that kindness still matters in a world that often forgets it, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about second chances and quiet miracles. Daniel Harper had not planned to sit in the park that afternoon. His assistant had canceled his last meeting, his driver was stuck in traffic, and the city felt too loud for a man who carried his thoughts like broken glass. At 42, Daniel was the CEO of a medical technology company praised for saving lives, yet he felt painfully disconnected from his own. His tailored coat and polished shoes looked out of place against the scattered leaves, but he welcomed the discomfort. It reminded him that he was still capable of feeling something. He held a paper cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink, staring at the ground as people passed by without noticing him. He preferred it that way. Being unseen felt easier than explaining the emptiness that followed him everywhere. The park was alive in soft ways. Children laughed somewhere near the swings, joggers passed in steady rhythm, and sunlight filtered through bare branches like fragile gold. Daniel watched it all as if from behind glass. He had learned to keep his distance from life after losing his wife Emily to cancer 3 years earlier. Her illness had been long, cruel, and relentless. And when it finally took her, it left Daniel with success that felt meaningless and a house too quiet to breathe in. He worked longer hours, donated more money, and told himself he was moving forward. In truth, he was standing still, afraid that if he slowed down, the grief would finally catch him. That was when he noticed the little girl. She stood a few feet away, no more than 5 or 6 years old, wearing a blue dress that looked carefully chosen and pink sneakers that had seen better days. Her blonde hair was slightly messy, catching the light like spun gold, and she clutched a small paper bag in both hands as if it were something precious. She wasn't staring at him the way children sometimes do when they sense sadness in adults. Instead, she looked at him with gentle determination, the kind that belongs to someone who has already learned life can be fragile and chooses bravery anyway. Daniel felt an unexpected tightening in his throat. He looked away at first, unsure why her presence unsettled him. Children reminded him of a future he no longer allowed himself to imagine. But when he glanced back, she was still there, waiting, as if she believed patience alone could change the world. He straightened slightly, unsure what was expected of him, and noticed how small her hands were, how thin her jacket looked for the chilly air. The girl's story revealed itself not through words, but through the weight of her purpose. Her mother was sick, very sick, and still found the strength to smile for her daughter every morning. The party the girl was planning was not a grand celebration with balloons and crowds, but a quiet gathering meant to remind her mother that she was loved, remembered, and not alone. The invitation she carried was simple, almost fragile, yet filled with more sincerity than any embossed card Daniel had ever sent in his life. In that moment, he understood that the man she had approached was not a powerful CEO to her. He was simply someone who looked lonely enough to need an invitation. Memories stirred uninvited. Daniel remembered Emily's smile during her worst days, how she insisted on celebrating small moments even when her body was failing. He remembered birthday candles lit in hospital rooms, and the way she squeezed his hand as if to reassure him that joy was still allowed. The park faded slightly as those memories washed over him, and for the first time in years he did not push them away. He let them stay. The little girl's name was Grace, a name that suited her in ways that felt almost too perfect. Her mother, Sarah Miller, was fighting an illness that had stolen her strength but not her warmth. Grace believed that if enough people came to her small party, if enough smiles filled the room, her mother's pain would somehow lessen. Children have a way of believing in things adults forget how to see. Daniel felt humbled by that belief, by the quiet courage it took for a child to ask a stranger for something so deeply personal. As Grace walked away, leaving Daniel with the weight of her hope, he realized something had shifted. The park no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a doorway. He sat there long after she disappeared down the path, staring at the paper bag she had held so carefully in his mind. He thought about how many times he had been invited into life and politely declined, choosing work, distance, or fear instead. This time, the invitation felt different. This time, it felt necessary. The days that followed were restless. Daniel found himself distracted during meetings, his thoughts returning again and again to the image of Grace standing bravely in the park. He instructed his assistant to clear his schedule for the weekend without explanation. For the first time in years, he drove himself instead of relying on a driver, navigating the quieter streets of a modest neighborhood far from his usual world. The house he arrived at was small but carefully kept, with a porch, decorated by handmade paper flowers taped along the railing. A sign made with uneven letters announced a celebration that mattered more than appearances. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of vanilla and coffee. The living room was modest, filled with mismatched chairs and a couch that had seen many years of use. Sarah sat near the window, wrapped in a soft blanket, her face pale but her eyes bright. She carried herself with a grace that spoke of resilience rather than weakness. Grace moved around the room with quiet excitement, making sure everything was just right, her seriousness softened by occasional bursts of joy. Daniel felt out of place at first, his presence larger than the room, but no one treated him as anything other than a welcomed guest. Neighbors arrived with simple gifts, homemade dishes, and genuine warmth. There was laughter, soft music playing from an old speaker, and moments of silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Daniel watched Sarah smile at her daughter with a depth of love that was both beautiful and painful to witness. It reminded him of the love he once shared with Emily, a love he had been afraid to touch since her passing. As the afternoon unfolded, Daniel found himself helping in small ways, refilling cups, listening to stories, and sitting quietly beside Sarah as sunlight warmed the room. There were no grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just a shared understanding that this moment mattered. Sarah's illness was not ignored, but it did not define her. What defined her was the way she looked at her daughter, the way she found joy in the presence of others, despite the weight she carried. Something inside Daniel softened further. He realized that all his success had never taught him how to live with loss, but this small gathering was showing him how to live with love again. He saw how community formed not through wealth or influence, but through presence. He felt the familiar ache of grief, but this time it was accompanied by something new: gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's life began to change in quiet, meaningful ways. He continued visiting the Millers, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes simply sitting and listening. He used his company's resources to connect Sarah with better home care, not as a public gesture, but as a personal promise. Grace greeted him each time with the same gentle confidence, as if she had always known he would return. The hardest day came sooner than anyone wanted. Sarah's health declined rapidly, and the house grew quieter. Daniel stood beside Grace during moments no child should have to face, offering stability without pretending to replace what was being lost. When Sarah passed away, it was peaceful, surrounded by love, her smile lingering in the memory of everyone who had known her. Grace held onto Daniel's hand, and for the first time since Emily's death, Daniel did not feel alone in his grief. Grief did not disappear, but it transformed. Daniel learned that love does not end when someone is gone. It changes shape and continues in the care we offer others. He became Grace's guardian, not out of obligation, but out of a shared journey that had woven their lives together. His large, quiet house filled with laughter again, with school projects on the table and drawings on the fridge. He learned how to be present in ways no boardroom ever taught him. Years later, Daniel often returned to the park where it all began. The bench was still there, worn but sturdy, surrounded by trees that changed with the seasons. Grace, taller now, walked beside him, her hand fitting comfortably in his. They talked about dreams, memories, and the quiet strength of her mother's smile. Daniel understood then that healing does not come from forgetting pain, but from allowing love to grow around it. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, presence, and unexpected connections, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that matter. Before the ending, we have one special request for you. Please comment below and share what this story made you feel, or tell us about a moment when a small act of kindness changed your life. In a world that often celebrates noise and speed, it is the quiet invitations that transform us most. A child's courage, a mother's smile, and a man's willingness to sit on a park bench instead of running from his pain became the beginning of a family, a healing, and a life rediscovered. And sometimes, the most important parties are not about celebration at all, but about reminding us that even in sickness, loss, and loneliness, love still shows up. And when it does, it changes everything. Time has a strange way of moving after loss. Some days rushed forward too fast, others barely moved at all. After Sarah's passing, the world did not stop, but for Grace, it felt as if it had tilted slightly off balance. Daniel saw it in the way she held her backpack tighter before school, in how she paused before answering simple questions, and in the quiet moments when she stared at nothing at all. Grief did not arrive loudly for her. It arrived gently, like fog, settling into corners of ordinary days. Daniel struggled too, though he tried not to show it. Becoming Grace's guardian had not been a decision made in a courtroom or with paperwork alone. It had been a promise formed in the quiet hours beside a hospital bed, a promise he intended to keep with his whole heart. Yet loving a child while carrying his own unhealed grief was not easy. At night, after Grace fell asleep clutching a stuffed rabbit her mother had sewn, Daniel would sit alone in the living room, surrounded by silence that felt familiar and dangerous. He worried constantly that he would fail her, that his success in business meant nothing when it came to raising a child who needed warmth more than structure. Grace sensed his fear even when he tried to hide it. Children often do. One evening, weeks after the funeral, she placed a crayon drawing gently on his desk while he was working late. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a sun that was much too large for the paper. One figure was labeled Mommy, the second Uncle Daniel, and the third me. Daniel stared at it for a long time before his vision blurred. It was the first time Grace had drawn her mother since she passed, and the fact that Daniel stood beside them both broke something open inside him. Not with pain, but with belonging. Slowly, their new life found its rhythm. Mornings were filled with rushed breakfasts and forgotten lunches, afternoons with homework spread across the kitchen table, evenings with simple dinners and stories. Before bed, Daniel learned that healing did not come from grand gestures. It came from consistency, from showing up every day, even when he felt inadequate, from listening when Grace spoke about her mother and staying quiet when she didn't. One afternoon, months later, Grace asked if they could visit the park, the same park where they had first met. Daniel hesitated, unsure if the memory would be too heavy for her, or for him. But he agreed. Autumn had returned, painting the trees in familiar colors. As they approached the old bench, Grace stopped and looked up at him. "This is where Mommy's party started," she said softly. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle in his chest. He sat down, and Grace climbed onto the bench beside him, her legs swinging gently. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled, a small, sincere smile that carried her mother's strength within it. "Mommy would like that we're okay," Grace said after a moment. She always smiled even when she was tired. Daniel finally understood then what Sarah had given them both. Not just love, but courage. The courage to keep living fully, even when life hurt. Years passed. Grace grew into a thoughtful, compassionate teenager with her mother's kindness and Daniel's quiet determination. Daniel stepped back from the relentless pace of his company, choosing purpose over prestige. Together, they started a small foundation in Sarah's name, one that helped families facing illness find support, connection, and moments of joy when they needed it most. No headlines, no publicity, just help. On the anniversary of Sarah's birthday, they hosted a simple gathering every year. Nothing extravagant, just cake, candles, and people who remembered. Grace always insisted on inviting someone new, someone who looked lonely, someone who reminded her of the man she once approached in a park with nothing but hope and a paper bag. One evening, after such a gathering, Grace stood beside Daniel as the last guests left. The house was warm with laughter that still lingered in the air. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Mommy's party never really ended." Daniel smiled, his eyes soft. He realized she was right. That small invitation had continued echoing through their lives, shaping who they became. If this continuation touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can grow even after loss, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs comfort, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that heal. And before we end, we have one heartfelt request. Please comment below and tell us who you would invite to your own small but meaningful party, or share a memory of someone who changed your life with kindness. Because sometimes the smallest invitations create the longest lasting miracles.